Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 6th. Welcome to the weekly Kubernetes SIG testing meeting. I am your moderator, Aaron Krickenberger, and this is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube to exist forever and ever until infinity and beyond. On the agenda today, we have a discussion item about what to do about Docker and Docker, so I'm going to hand it over to Tim Sinclair to talk about that.
So I want to preface this conversation with a bit of history and to understand where the touch points are. There have been a plethora of solutions to stand up Docker and Docker clusters. Possibly the most notable one has been Mirantis. That's been the most widely adopted one. And we've wanted to use this solution, the cluster lifecycle, to automate some testing of kubeadm for some time. And in fact, we've even wanted to get rid of a lot of the ad hoc developer tooling that exists. We just haven't had people to see it through in the SIG, right? It's one of those things where it's been on the SIG agenda list for a really long time, and we want people to execute on it, but we haven't gotten consensus to get a group of people to want to do it because there's been other things that have been long-standing. That's the SIG cluster lifecycle piece. The testing commons piece has started a while ago, but Maru and I were chatting ad hoc just the other day, and we were also, Heptio as a company also plans to resource this. We were talking about a common set of tooling and a little abstraction layer that we wanted to write a spec for that basically allowed folks to say, give me a cluster. And that cluster, you could almost think of it kind of like the cluster API, where you could specify some configuration of nodes and it would basically spin up a cluster for you. But the integration piece would be specifically, the back end would be a DIND cluster. Because a lot of folks across the multiple repos have a desire to want to have this tooling, right? Because standing up a cluster to do integration testing as it exists today in the mainline is something. It's not really like an actual cluster. It's this hodgepodgery of components that are partially stubbed out to make an integration test. And we wanted to have a more formalized mechanism to do that. And along the way, there was some efforts by Google to push in to the mainline a similar type of project, but done a little bit differently. And I think the question and issue that arose is, where should this live? Because it kind of falls into many buckets. And who is going to own and maintain this over time so that it actually solves the state space of problems, so that we can kind of get rid of the 10, there's about at least 4 or 5 different DIND solutions that exist right now. So that's kind of framing the whole state space and the background of why we're having part of this conversation here.
Can you can punt me out of this question if it's going to push us in circles, but can I understand what you mean by integration testing? Like why it has to involve standing up a fully fledged cluster?
So right now, the integration tests that exist today, there's no unified integration test for people across repositories, right? People can't really reuse the current integration tests once we do the repo forking. That's impossible because they would have to vendor in Kubernetes, right? So DIND gives them a way to stand up well-versioned artifacts in an actual cluster configuration. All I really want back from an API perspective is pass in a configuration that says my cluster has this kind of shape, right? And then I get back a handle, which is my client, right? And that's kind of the conversation that Maru and I were having. That's the ideal shape that we would like to have, right? Because as we start to split these repos apart, one of the common themes that we're having is we need a bed to exercise an integration piece, right? If I have a kube control test suite, I need to test that against something, right? If I have this other repository over here, like I'll be greedy. I'll say Heptio Sonabui. I need to be able to have this integration test piece that does this, right?
Yeah, maybe it's semantics. Like, I guess it sounds an awful lot to me like just another end-to-end test or another functional test, only it's against like a lightweight cluster or a cluster without a cloud provider, so to speak. It's not actually like...
It's hermetically sealed to a single host.
I think to me the difference, like integration, we use integration end-to-end pretty loosely because the style of test you see in end-to-end today isn't necessarily requiring like a full cluster. For me, I kind of have the distinction, end-to-end test is given a configuration to test. It's given, a cluster client or whatever. Integration tests, they have some control over what they're going to test. They could spin up, a Docker and Docker cluster. They could spin up an API server and run some controllers against it. They have a lot more control, but it's really, I don't know whether it really matters. If you can give a test client or however many clients you need for whatever, what does it matter what's on the back end? Could be an API server backed by Hollow nodes, could be an API server backed by Docker and Docker nodes. It could be a real cluster. I think part of the goal, sorry, go ahead.
It does depend a little bit because every solution has a test surface it can handle. For instance, Docker and Docker will not be able to test cloud providers. Docker and Docker will probably have trouble testing anything that needs kernel modules like NFS or some networking solutions. Whereas a VM integration environment would be able to test basically vanilla open source Kubernetes with no cloud providers and no storage providers like vSphere. So the testing environment you're in dictates which of our tests you can run.
Fair enough. I guess I'm just trying to point out that there are a large swath of the tests that don't actually have those underlying dependencies.
Yeah, I would say of the conformance tests, like probably 90% of them can be running against Docker and Docker, or 95%.
Yeah, but I still want to keep them as separate end-to-end conformance tests because the tests themselves are an artifact that you can produce and run against any client stub, right? I wouldn't want to jig them into integration tests as the integration tests live today because that's kind of a lump, right? You can't take that out. You could build a separate artifact, but be a monstrosity, right?
Sure, but so with our current testing binary that we build, you can do conformance test or E2E test because the tests are tagged, right?
Yeah.
So you can tag a test as conformance, and rather than build its own standalone binary, you simply run the test as a conformance test as opposed to a GKE test.
Okay, I think that sufficiently answered my question. So I want to go back to Tim's question about like, where does it make the most sense for this to live and who makes the most sense to own it? I have no dog in this fight. I saw a spirited discussion in Slack to the point where we couldn't seemingly resolve this in Slack chat. So I want to understand how can we make the most use of our high bandwidth time here to resolve this?
Okay, I'll start. My goal right now is not to make a generic Docker and Docker solution. I think that would be nifty, and I certainly considered it as a future direction, right? Like it's not like off the table for something it could evolve into, but it's not my objective. My objective is continuous integration and being able to do something on the dev desktop that is effectively the same as continuous integration or as close as it can be, with kernel differences. So a very limited scope and also very specific requirements. For instance, spinning up hundreds or thousands of these because of the CI environment. And we would like this sooner than later, right? We want to just simply go get something working for our use case. And if it so happens in the future that a generic Docker and Docker platform works for us, we would absolutely use that for better maintainability, but it does not exist today.
One thing I'd say, just as a outside collaborator on a few external projects, this is something that would definitely be useful externally if there were some kind of generic way to do this. I've been trying to keep track of the Docker and Docker efforts generally in the Kubernetes project. Right now, we have to use Minikube and a mismatch of VM drivers and so on. And obviously Docker and Docker would be great to get here.
That's kind of the point, is that I don't want to have a certain myopathy, because that could potentially limit the larger scope at hand. What I kind of wanted to do was rally on a proposal. I think we would probably bring a lot of ducks to the fight here to help make this go, if we had a proposal in place that says we want to do this and these are the reasons why. Because I think there are many interested parties that all want this piece of the puzzle. And for me, I would absolutely love to get rid of the dev and test environment that people use for local cluster up. I think that's a monstrosity. And if we use the artifacts that we produce as part of that setup for local cluster up, and just it shims around and creates a DIND cluster, that's even better, because we're testing the full suite. Developers are naturally part of the life cycle of this test infrastructure that we're creating.
So the first thing I'll say is I think iterative solutions are normally pretty good. I think if we do this and then network providers want to use it to test their CNI implementation, that's not actually very difficult to do. It's not, the only reason it's not feasible in what I've done is because I haven't put the time into it yet, because it's not my particular objective. I have a pretty good idea about how I would go about doing it, but it's not what I put my time into, because it's not what I'm trying to achieve. However, if you were to go talk to the Weave guys and say, okay, well, why don't you go make sure that that works? I think that is optimal. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that I don't want our testing framework to be in any way blocked on the potential future existence of a yet undesigned, unspec'd system that hasn't even really had requirements gathered yet. When I say our, I think what I mean is Kubernetes in general, right? Like, we want an in-tag testing framework. That's what I mean by that.
And what is the specific goal that you have in mind? Because the problem with you creating one is now this is the sixth incantation of a system, which would eventually, my goal is to kind of reduce the problem space, right? And if it's kind of like, if you want to go fast, go alone, but this is a community project. Right?
So the first thing is that we will not be able to design the generic thing with this with CI unimplemented. We're probably going to discover things that we haven't thought of a priority. Furthermore, it's give me a sec. I'll need a second to phrase my next thought. I'll pass it to you.
I mean, I
don't disagree with that. I think, but the way the community operates, here's the conundrum, right? This clearly affects a lot of people, right? That by definition, it would affect us because we want to be able to create this piece, but there is now a fourth component that we would have to redux, or a fifth or sixth component we'd have to redux into this. Like, well, all I'm trying to do is we can rally on a spec, we can find an interim home and find a long-term path that everyone can agree to, and ideally we help everybody, right? That's kind of.
I'm not against a solution that solves everyone's use case. What I am against is blocking existing development on something sort of in the nebulous future that's not even resourced at the moment.
So I'm trying to suss out whether we're talking about competing goals or competing priorities here. So can you just sort of help me lay out, like, what is goal number one, and then what is the roadmap?
So from my point of view, goal number one is to get Docker and Docker test working in CI, and to get it working on dev desktops in an environment that is very, very similar to CI, something close to hermetic.
I think my concern with this is, if you're just using this in CI and that was its only purpose, have at it, right? But where I get concerned is talking about, yes, you're going to get developers starting to use this. Well, there's already tools in the developer space. And by putting this front and center in KK, you say this is the really important project, and you de-emphasize the importance of existing efforts. And to me, that's problematic. It's kind of like undercutting the community. And I understand the point. Like, I definitely want to have something lighter weight to run our tests. So I just want a solution that actually like works for developers too. And if it's really CI focused,
it depends on what you're trying to develop, right? Like a lot of Mirantis is, so this is just to test Kubernetes. That's the objective. Mirantis has a lot of other goals, right? It wants to, if I recall correctly, it wants to be able to test Kubernetes on multiple base images to simulate multiple operating systems. We don't care about that because we have the node E2E tests. People also use Mirantis to spin up a cluster to test other software. While this is totally possible in the future, it's not actually an explicit goal of what we want. We want something.
Why is what, I mean, I kind of get the Docker and Docker piece. That's not really what Mirantis does. But when I think about like, if I'm a developer and I'm running something, I don't really need Docker and Docker, right? I just need to be able to run a cluster on a single Docker host. My concern is, kind of seems like in a lot of ways there's overlap, or perhaps the solution that you're proposing is a subset of what Mirantis does today. And maybe it's not a complete, like maybe that solution doesn't solve all the problems, but the question is, how hard is that to fix versus doing it separately?
So there are a few major tech debt areas in Mirantis. And if you go back and you look at the GitHub issues talking about mainlining Mirantis or even bringing it into an incubator, the discussions are largely like, this is a great idea in concept, but we don't want Mirantis in particular because of its various forms of tech debt. For instance, several thousand lines of bash code. Another thing it does that I do not believe we should do is it uses the build system as an API, which is simply, it's not reliable and it's actually downright dangerous for testing. Because if the build system is used as an API and we want to change the build system, but the CI will actually kick that out because it won't be able to build the system. So the only way to really do this correctly is to have it hook into our build system. And hooking into the build system like that cuts out a lot of the complexity, as does the Docker and Docker in Docker. And Mirantis, it does do a lot more than the system we're talking about.
I agree with Eric's comment. I think we are starting to go into the weeds a little bit. I think there's priorities and landing home, right? So like you have a high priority to get this done, whether it be Google or whatnot. But the where it crosses the line is from CI to dev and test, right?
Well, hang on, just real quickly before we get there, because I heard Eric up top say like he wants to move to a world where this is used as a merge blocking test, right? But I feel like I heard Quentin say that he wants to be able to stand up a Docker and Docker cluster with his tool set on a local dev machine. Those seem to be two goals at odds, and I'm hearing you guys say that it's not.
I don't believe they're at odds. I believe that.
Hang on, just so I get it out there. And I'm hearing Cluster Lifecycle say this isn't a full-fledged enough solution for the needs of like testing kubeadm and a local dev machine, right?
I want people to be able to run the CI the same tests that get run in CI. I want someone to be able to run those locally in a reliable fashion, so that they don't have to go poke the Kate spot to run our tests. I want them to be able to just do it on their shell.
To me, Quentin, I would say it's fair to say that you are committed to wanting to do this project, correct?
Yeah, I want this project.
Okay, so I feel like we're spending a lot of effort with very valid points about like maybe this is not a great project to be doing because there's a bunch of existing efforts that are very similar. Great, but I feel like that's not really the conversation you are interested in having. But I feel like there is substantial pushback around the idea that if this is in the main repo, it makes it seem like this is a blessed project when it doesn't deserve that yet, given that this is more of a experiment than a best practice.
So the problem is
I feel like there are, I mean, whatever, Timothy and Maru are here. I don't necessarily feel like I feel like there's whatever, that's not necessarily that these are two outliers. I'm sure if we expand the argument, that will not feel like less of the case, because I do feel like this is an experiment at this point, given that there's no evidence of its success just yet.
The problem is that the difficulty and complexity and the reliability increases dramatically when you move it out of the repo, out of the build system. For instance, trying to hook into Bazel from outside of it now, outside of the build system, has problems with the transitive dependencies of workspaces. We pull in all kinds of repositories inside of Kubernetes that we would then have to maintain also in the build system. Turning the build API, the build system into an API, of course, creates problems of ever changing the build system because CI will reject those changes. There are also lots of Bazel issues about what if the Bazel versions aren't version synced, because Bazel, since it's not 1.0, will make breaking changes. These systems will need to be changed in lockstep.
Yeah, but let's pause for a second here. You are a consumer of artifacts from the mainline build. Yes or no?
Yes, I'm a consumer of artifacts.
So you are a consumer of artifacts from the mainline build. The repository eventually will be forked into many repositories, and that process is in flight across a number of fronts, which means that you will have to coalesce your CI testing infrastructure across all of these repositories.
Yeah, and today the way we coalesce is in the Kubernetes repo itself.
But
in the future,
that's today. In the future, there's going to be but
in the future, we currently are expecting to do it with something like Bazel workspace dependencies and transitive dependencies, right? So how we do it in the future will of course change how this system is built.
I don't think that is, I feel like that is an idea we have. I also don't think that, I don't think we've exactly figured out how our multi-repo.
Yeah,
it's not even clear that people will ever be, a required way of building, for example. So I don't think we should have. I mean, I'm as big a Bazel proponent as it gets, but I also, recognize that Bazel is sort of an unproven, experimental thing.
Yeah, I was just giving it as an example of when we go to multi-repo, we will of course have different tooling. And with the different tooling, there will be a different way that we integrate. And the tool that goes and tests everything will have to aggregate or collate all of these things in a different way. But that's not how it is today. Today, how it is it's all brought together in this one main repo.
So the thing I'm struggling with is I'm working on stuff out of tree. And I'm trying to figure out how I can pull together integration test fixture so that I can work without having to vendor or otherwise cut stuff out of Kubernetes. I mean, is the idea that an external repo would just be able to consume images?
Yeah, so the idea is that this build system will publish, much like we publish e.test, this binary. What I want to do is I want to publish a Docker image that you can use to spin up your cluster, right? That's all it does. Is it basically the only thing this needs to do in the repo is grab the Debians you need, shove them into an image, and package that all together, right? A couple things like that. And so all it does is produce a Docker image that you can run from anywhere.
And how does this get configured? How do I decide, characteristics of a cluster, whether configuration or node count or other things like that?
So at the moment, I initially wrote it with some more config options, but at the moment there are none. It spins up a cluster in one configuration, and that's the configuration we want to test. It's 3 nodes, 1 master. It would be what I would like to do if we decide to configure it in a more advanced way is to either use the config APIs inside of the master or pass in a YAML file to kubeadmin. And I think we're losing our room. If you want to stay on and continue this, I can come back on in a minute. Yeah, we can move, or we can move to Slack. Your choice.
I think, Maru and Timothy, I'd be interested, are there things that would, is there anything that would convince you that putting this into the main repo now would be a good idea, and or when would you feel like putting it into the main repo? Like like, I feel like you guys are primarily against having this experiment happen inside the main repo, but what would change that, if anything?
Write a proposal and let's gather the troops and execute on it. I'm totally fine with it being external. I have no qualms at all with it being in test infra or some type of release jiggery. But I think in the main line, there's a political ramification that seems to be ignored. And I don't want to undercut other people's work, and I want to make sure we rally them together so that way we can have a solution for that long term, right?
I think I'm kind of in that same, like if that's the only way we can do it. I mean, my main concern was, can I consume it outside the repo? Is that, how easy or hard is that going to be? It doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue. But I do agree that the political implications of putting something in KK, like, especially given that, Mirantis wasn't even given incubator status despite its utility. It just seems like kind of a slap in the face to their efforts. And it wasn't just, Mirantis, that effort predates them before Cube8am came around.
And I'm in the interest of like most compromise possible. I'm wondering like how could we make it very clear that this is an experiment while still iterating in the main repo? Is it such a hard political stance that if it goes in the mainline repo at all, it is suddenly considered blessed? Or is there anything we can do to make it clear that we're iterating here because it's easier for now and it will be moved out as a long-term plan or something?
Well, it won't necessarily be moved out unless there's a technical reason to do it. The reason I want it in the Kubernetes repo is that it's the only place where it is sort of technically correct to do it. And you end up running into a lot of problems, technical problems that require code and failure modes once you move it outside of the build system.
I mean, aren't you talking though about, like, you're just consuming some build artifacts? Why, like, if you're in CI and you just have a pipeline where Kubernetes builds some things and then something else consumes them, and
so I'm not consuming the build artifacts of the release, right? I'm not consuming. So there are some build artifacts that are very robust and very stable and expensive to produce, right? Those aren't what I'm interacting with. I'm interacting with the sort of raw components themselves.
I'm not sure I understand that. Like, in my head, I have this dumb assertion that at the end of the Kubernetes build that's run for every pull request, you have a tarball that has all the binaries. And I could very easily see some external repo or some external set of scripts consuming that tarball, stuffing those binaries into the appropriate Docker containers, and then pushing those someplace as a set of artifacts to be run as like Docker and Docker.
Yeah, so rather than consume that, I am consuming something more fine-grained, just the things I need to, just the targets I need to consume, and this makes the build lighter weight, and
But I mean, why can't you partition the results of like the full build and say, I only want these things? I guess I'm having a hard time understanding.
That's sort of what this is. Rather than producing a bunch of things I don't need, I'm literally just producing the components I do need.
So, can you give me examples of the stuff you don't need, just to help me understand what we're talking about here, versus the stuff you do?
So, for instance, Hypercube. I don't need Hypercube. I don't need the final tarball we produce. I don't need all of the Swagger stuff, right? I really only need kubectl, kubeadmin, kubelet, and the master components. And so I simply depend directly on those and grab them, and it's considerably faster to do so. And in addition to that, another problem is that there are components that I need that don't exist.
Such as?
Well, I mean, I guess like I could produce them elsewhere, but yeah, it's mostly about making it fine-grained.
I'm just wondering if you're saying that like our release tarball doesn't have the appropriate artifacts.
I'm saying the release tarball is expensive.
So, I mean, in the context of, you know,
Just-
whether CI, sorry, go ahead, Aaron.
I just like, I didn't think that the pull request, Eric, maybe you know, I didn't, or Cole, like I didn't think the Kubernetes build job that runs on every pull request does a full-fledged release build. I thought it only built like just those. I didn't think it built Hypercube. Maybe I'm wrong.
It does a release build or a quick release build, depending.
So, and quick release doesn't include Hypercube, does it?
I believe it does. I don't know what's going on at that level.
So while you were changing rooms, you know, Timothy was suggesting that if we wanted in the main repo, we should have a proposal to, you know, talk about these sorts of details, which sounds to me reasonable and like an appropriate thing to do for the main repo. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how interested people are in talking about all the details. I mean, I guess I am. And maybe it seems like most of the people on this call are, but maybe.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to run it long, and you're right. I did just want to circle back to, I think like if it sounds, Quentin, like you kind of have the same goal as Tim does, which is we do actually want to rally the troops around one true way of doing this instead of having yet another implementation. And so,
I mean, what I'm saying is I would like that, but it's not my goal, right? My goal is to do CI and to have a test environment locally that is similar to CI. That is my actual goal. I am in favor of one way of doing things, but that's not my explicit objective.
right. I guess I'm just getting a strong sense from Tim and Maru that if you're doing something that you think is just well scoped for CI, it's going to be confused as an attempt to fulfill all of these other goals we've talked about. Plus, since it's being done in the mainline Kubernetes repo, it's being implicitly blessed as the one true way of doing this.
I mean, I don't actually agree that putting something in the Kubernetes repo is a blessing like that.
So I understand that is your perception, but I also have an understanding that there's a much wider audience who kind of, for better or for worse, no matter how many words we use.
Repo all of the time.
Yeah, but no matter how many words we use about it, people are still going to look at it that way. This is part of why, like, we with my steering committee hat on, right? We're really trying to like not have anybody create anything new in that repo. It should be a really high wall to climb with written justification in the form of a proposal that explains why there instead of any place else. It's a piece of like technical and process that we followed in the beginning of the project that we wish to correct going forward, which is why he's talking about how many pieces of the repo are going to be broken out, right?
I mean, yeah, we've talked about breaking things out of the repo for a long time, but it's never been because we consider the repo to be some sort of, we don't put it on a pedestal and say that these are the blessed things. We wanted to break them out for technical reasons.
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, technical reasons are one of the justifications for moving things out. Another one might be velocity, because everything.
Yeah, and I was going to actually give velocity as an example of a technical reason, but
I think that there is a sociological aspect to this, which is if it's in that repo, that's kind of becomes the focal point because it's already there. It is implicitly blessed, whether you want to think about it that way or not. And if something is done outside the repo, that leaves a lot more room for other people to experiment, because it's not the only solution. There has to be there's a cost, obviously, as you're making clear. It's not free, because you have to have an integration point. You have to be able to do what you need to do outside the repo.
So I have a question for you. Are you against any Docker and Docker implementation being in the main repo?
At this point, probably, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not carte blanche.
Do you have a technical reason for that, or is it only political?
I think it's less about do I want. Back up. Okay, so it's not that I don't want to see a Docker solution in the repo, but I think, as Tim was saying, there should be a process to get it there. There should be a degree of like, is this a good idea from the community at large? All interested parties, not just our limited cabal. That's the main thing. So if we can get consensus on that, I'm totally fine with it being, and I'm not fighting because just for the sake of fighting. It's more like there's a wider community to consider for this in the context of this decision, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
I'll have to mull things over.
I mean, I want a Docker solution for exactly what's going on. I want to make sure that A, it can evolve, and B, it can coexist peacefully with other solutions.
I feel like, I feel like the focus should be on one, explaining either why, whatever we want to do, why this is not the blessed way, but just an experiment that is not, preventing other potential competing ideas from proving themselves. The second thing might be explaining why it is necessary, like why the pains of not having it be in the main repo would be so great that this is the only and or best way to do that, given the fact that it's sort of suggesting the blessing despite the mitigations of the the mitigations about how it's just experimental. And then the third thing would be showing why this has earned its rightful place as the, solution. And to me, it seems like, So to me, I feel like the proposal should sort of focus on those three things. And I feel like that would make it clearer, why we need to do this and or why it might actually be better to do it elsewhere.
I agree with that.
I mean, I like the reasoning of that. Like, look, I didn't, again, like I said, not having a dog in this fight, I just didn't particularly care for the way it seemed as though two people swooped in at seemingly the last second and said, whoa, what's going on here as an impediment to progress. At the same time, I recognize this issue has been discussed before, and like it was really hard for interested parties to figure out what's going on. So like I think Eric's proposal sounds to me like the best compromise to sort of allow work to continue if it's truly easier to happen in the mainline repo and it's truly just an experiment from now. Writing that down and explaining how and why would be useful to communicate this to the wider audience. And then I agree with Maru's point that, this is more about just making sure we can involve the wider community. But like, I'm totally can we just execute on the simple thing and iterate? So I would really like us not to have to spend a bunch of political documenting just so we can iterate. Because I think we all want to iterate.
I think that's well said. I think you summed up my position very well.
But I mean, I will say, like, I'd certainly be happier if we were iterating out of tree, right? So it would help me to understand specifically why we have to be iterating in tree. And I just kind of keep going back to the proposal.
Yeah, I'd be happier if we got to a place where the arguments were like, oh, we need to have it in tree because of X. And then we can either agree that X makes it necessary, or no, actually we could do X prime or Y. But I feel like we're not actually we're sort of having all these overarching arguments about, other things. And I'd like to switch it to where, we have that discussion about like, is this an effective mitigation or not? Does this actually make it necessary to have in the main tree or not?
Yeah.
I'm not entirely clear like why there just couldn't be a build target that produces exactly what you need versus having to have it in tree for the sake of that same result. But maybe I'm missing something. I do want to apologize. I didn't see that PR. I didn't see that document. And that was like, I had some pretty crazy personal stuff happening to me in August that kind of like caused me to disconnect from a lot of things. And so I totally like hit reset on my email and unfortunately didn't see that. So my discovering it now and at the last minute wasn't like, it's not personal, and I'm really sorry. I certainly wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that sort of last minute attention either.
I mean, that's That's totally understandable. Like I said, having no dog in this fight, it seemed like just a repeat of the discussion we had the last time Quentin came up and sort of demoed his work. And we were all at like, well, this is great, but we've seen this 4 or 5 times before. Why are we doing this? And so now it seems like the work has progressed a little bit and we're still kind of having a similar conversation. I just wanted us to get to the place where we could have a productive discussion. And to me, it sounds like having some of this, the technical meat here written down so that we could have some time to digest it and discuss the specifics would be really useful going forward.
Yeah, as somebody relatively new to the space, having something written out would be really nice because I think I have an overall grasp of what we're trying to get to, but it would be nice to have something written down to dig into a little deeper.
Because again, to go back to the thing up top, like my personal big picture view of this is the largest win is if we get to the point where this is of sufficient fidelity that we could use this to block all pull requests going in instead of spinning up full fidelity clusters on GCE and AWS and everywhere, it would rapidly increase our testing velocity across the project.
Or even if we only move, if it's just that we move 90% or 95% of tests to it, that would be enough too.
Right. Like this to me,
it doesn't have to replace E2E tests, it just has to replace it for run-of-the-mill tests.
Right. That's like because people are unwilling to move code out of the test E2E tree. If it turns out most of that code runs against a significantly faster cluster with less spin-up time, that's a big win for everybody.
Okay, so I'll go work on a document writing up all of these technical reasons of why it's not Mirantis and why it should be in the tree. So that's kind of I already did a lot of that work because I kind of thought that's the discussion we'd be having now.
Right.
But for now, I think I'm gonna have to call it. I don't actually have a chair here.
No, that's fine. I think we're basically done. So we'll look forward to seeing that come across the mailing list, and we'll go from there. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry for running long, but I think this was useful.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
I got a call from a random number. Would you pull up Velodrome's dashboard?